They taped that notice to my front door like I was some trespassing drifter who'd wandered onto someone else's porch. No knock, no warning, just a bold, official-looking message. 30 days to vacate. I stood there, still holding the bag of coffee I'd just picked up, staring at the words like they were screaming in my face, "You don't belong here." I almost had the damn thing framed. Because when someone gets drunk off their HOA power trip and thinks they can rewrite reality, with paperwork and fines, you know it's about to get messy. My name is Travis Lane, and this little cabin on Cedar Lake, it's where I used to run barefoot in the summer, roast fish with my grandpa, and fall asleep to the sound of the water lapping against the dock. It's my home now. The only thing my grandfather left me when he passed. But to the self-appointed kings of this new HOA, it's just an eyesore in their perfectly curated lakefront fantasy. I didn't yell. I didn't call a lawyer. I just sat on the porch, took a sip of hot coffee, and stared out at the lake. Because I knew one thing. If they thought they just scared off some nobody with a piece of printer paper, they picked the wrong man. I've been a land surveyor in Denver for nearly 15 years. My life is boundary lines, corner stakes, title deeds, and zoning disputes. I've helped hundreds of people prove what's theirs, and I know exactly what happens when people skip reading the part labeled actual ownership. So when I got that notice, I didn't panic. I powered up my laptop, pulled open the drawer where my granddad used to keep his old fishing gear, and took out the original deed, locked inside a weathered capped survey tube, Cedar Lake boundary. Map, 1967. Notarized, city seal, clear as daylight, his name back then, mine now. The paper they taped to my door? It's just a bad joke compared to the legal title that covers the lakefront, dock, and the very ground they host their monthly HOA meetings on. But I didn't strike back right away. Because in this country, you don't need to yell to be heard. You just need paperwork, and the law on your side. I knew they'd come back. That notice was just the opening move. And I knew exactly where the battlefield would be. Not the grass, not the paint color, but the very dirt beneath their polished shoes. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't just going to defend my cabin, I was going to give them a crash course in land rights, legacy, and humility. The second time they showed up, it wasn't a letter, it was a woman. I was on the porch sanding down the old rocking chair my granddad used to sit in every morning with a coffee and his pocket radio. The air smelled like cedar and lake breeze. Then came the sound of heels on gravel, sharp, deliberate, like punctuation marks slamming into pavement. She stopped right at the edge of my porch. Didn't set one foot on it. That's important. It meant she knew she wasn't supposed to. She looked about mid-40s, hair pulled so tight in a bun it could hold up scaffolding, lips pursed like she'd just tasted lemon juice. In her hand, clipboard, pen, printed HOA badge swinging from a lanyard like it meant something. "Mr. Lane, I presume?" she said, eyes sweeping the porch like she was judging its existence. I set the sandpaper down and met her gaze. "That's right." She didn't smile, didn't blink. "I'm Cheryl Eastwood, acting vice president of the Cedar Grove Lakefront Homeowners Association." I raised an eyebrow. "Acting?" She flinched just slightly. "President Montgomery is currently on a wellness retreat. I'm handling active compliance issues in his absence." I nodded slowly. "So, I'm an issue now?" "Sir," she said, with all the fake calm of someone who's just rehearsed this conversation in their bathroom mirror, "this cabin is in violation of multiple HOA aesthetic standards, occupancy requirements, and lakeside safety ordinances. We're asking that you vacate within the 30-day period outlined in our notice." I leaned back in the rocking chair, wiped a bit of dust off my jeans. "And you're aware this cabin isn't under your HOA's jurisdiction?" She froze. Just a flicker, but I caught it. "Sir, Cedar Grove HOA manages the shared community environment of the lake, including shoreline regulations and—" "No," I interrupted, keeping my voice level. "You claim to manage what's never been yours. This cabin's older than your HOA. My grandfather built it in '66, and I've got the land records to prove this entire strip, including the dock and most of your walking path, isn't just outside your jurisdiction." It's legally mine. Now she blinked, hard, and for the first time, her clipboard dipped ever so slightly. She tried to regroup. Mr. Lane, I don't believe this kind of hostility is productive. The HOA has always operated under the assumption. There it is, I said. Assumption. That's what your entire game is built on, isn't it? Intimidate people. Hope they don't check the fine print. Send letters, show up with clipboards, and talk like you've got the sheriff on speed dial. But here's the truth. You don't own this lake. You don't own this dock, and you sure as hell don't own me. There was a long silence between us. The only sound was the breeze moving through the pines behind the cabin. Then she smiled. The kind of tight, artificial smile that belongs in an HOA manual titled How to Appear Professional While Threatening Someone. I hope we can resolve this amicably, Mr. Lane, she said, turning on her heel. You'll be hearing from us again. I didn't say a word. I just watched her walk back to her shiny white SUV, parked partially across my boundary line, by the way, and drive off. I'll admit, part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to scream. But the biggest part of me felt like my grandfather was standing right behind me, hand on my shoulder, saying, "Know your land, Travis. Know every damn inch of it." And I did. Not just because of his lessons, but because I'd spent the last 2 nights going through every legal document he ever stored in the lockbox under the floorboards. Deeds, water rights, survey maps dating back to the 1950s, and my favorite, a notarized contract confirming that the HOA's so-called community dock was actually built 10 feet onto our property. They weren't just wrong, they were trespassing, and I had the documents, the photos, and now Cheryl's little visit, all perfectly timed. I pulled out my phone and started compiling everything. Dates, maps, the footage from the security camera hidden in the birdhouse my grandfather had carved. Oh yeah, he was a quiet man, but not a naive one. I wasn't just going to protect my home, I was going to expose their entire operation. Let's just say, if they wanted a fight, they were about to learn something about land rights they didn't teach in any HOA orientation. That night, I didn't sleep much, not because I was worried, I knew the facts were on my side, but because I could feel it in my gut. This wasn't going to stop with a clipboard and a warning. People like Cheryl never retreat after just one swing. No, they reload. So I stayed up with a pot of black coffee, spreading out my grandfather's old survey maps across the kitchen table like battle plans. The cabin creaked as the wind rolled off the lake. Somewhere in the distance, an owl let out. A low, drawn-out call, a sound I remembered from my childhood when summer nights meant campfires and stories on this very porch. Back then, this place felt like freedom. Untouched. Pure. Now, it felt like occupied territory. Grandpa Robert wasn't a talker, but he was a man of documents. He kept everything, tax records, property surveys, even letters from the county zoning board dating back to the 70s. And in those folders, I found gold. A complete topographic outline of the original lakeshore, with his name listed as Sol, owner of Parcel 3B, which included not only the cabin and the dock, but the narrow strip of land that now served as the HOA's scenic walking trail. It wasn't speculation. It was fact. And Cheryl? She was trespassing on it every time she took her little compliance walks along the lakeside with her fake authority badge swinging like a sheriff in an old western. The more I dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a petty HOA squabble. This was a hostile takeover attempt. They wanted the cabin gone not because it broke some arbitrary rule, but because it stood as a reminder that their little lakeside empire wasn't built on solid ground. They were banking on me being clueless, on me packing up and leaving without a fight. They wanted silence. They were about to get the opposite. By morning, I had compiled a legal file so thick it could hold open the front door during a storm. And as I brewed another cup of coffee, I made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Lyle Kendrick, a no-nonsense property attorney I'd worked with during my land survey days. The kind of guy who could spot a forged plat map from 50 feet and scare an HOA board into rewriting their bylaws. "Travis Lane," he answered, his voice still sharp as a razor. "Heard you disappeared into the woods. What did you dig up?" I gave him the highlights. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Sounds like they built their castle on your lawn." "You in?" I asked. "I'm in," he said. "Email me the documents. Let's remind them what a property line actually means." Just afternoon, I stepped outside with the file in my hands and nailed a laminated copy of my deed right onto the HOA's walking trail sign. Not vandalizing it, just correcting it. I added a little note underneath in bold red letters, "Private property. Trespassers will be documented, recorded, and prosecuted. T. Lane, legal owner of parcels, 3A, 3B, and adjacent dock rights. Let's just say it didn't take long for the whispers to start. By sunset, I saw Cheryl again. She was standing at the edge of the trail with two other HOA board members, both in khaki slacks and matching embroidered polos, trying to act like this was still their turf. One of them had a tape measure. The other had what looked like a legal pad full of scribbles. I stood on the porch, arms crossed. This time, they didn't come close. Because now they knew. I wasn't just some guy living in an old cabin. I was the landowner, and their precious community was about to learn that you don't send eviction notices to someone who holds the deed to the dock they sunbathe on. 3 days of silence. No new letters. No cars creeping by. No khaki-wearing HOA disciples strolling my dock trail with fake concern about vegetation overgrowth. I thought maybe they'd taken the hint. I was wrong. It was just calm before the HOA storm. Saturday morning, I was splitting firewood behind the cabin, just as my grandfather used to. One solid swing at a time, using the old axe he sharpened every winter like it was part of a ritual. That's when I heard it. A knock. Not on the front door, on the side wall. Like someone didn't even know where the entrance was. I rounded the corner, axe still in hand, and there they were, 3 of them. Clipboards in tow, polos tucked in, name tags freshly laminated. One had a miniature laser measurer. The other held a binder labeled Architectural Compliance. I almost burst out laughing. "Can I help you?" I asked, leaning on the axe like I meant it. The woman in the middle stepped forward. Tall, red glasses, smug smile. "Good morning, Mr. Lane. We're with the Silver Lake HOA Architectural Committee. We're conducting a visual inspection per HOA code section." I cut her off. "This cabin isn't under HOA jurisdiction. We've already been through this." She smiled like a teacher dealing with a slow student. "While your claim of ownership is noted, the optics of your property still affect neighboring residents. We're here to document potential violations that may be detrimental to community harmony." "Community harmony?" I repeated, stunned. "You mean chopping wood offends someone's aesthetic?" The guy with the laser measurer muttered, "Non-uniform roof slope," pointing at the gabled cabin. I stared at him. "You're measuring my roof angle?" He blinked. "It's 11 degrees off standard." I leaned in. "You mean 11 degrees off your new build spec, for homes built in the last 10 years. This cabin was approved and recorded in 1966 under A. Zoning Code 4B. I've got the file stamped and notarized if you'd like a copy to take back to your coloring books." They huddled. Seriously. These 3 full-grown adults formed a mini huddle, whispering behind clipboards like middle schoolers planning how to ask for extra credit. Then the red glasses woman tried again. "Mr. Lane, if you continue to resist cooperation, we may have to escalate this matter through the Community Standards Tribunal." I almost dropped the axe from laughing. "Community Standards Tribunal," I said. "Is that before or after the Knights of the Round Table? Because unless that tribunal operates out of the county courthouse, I suggest you walk that nonsense off my property." Then I pointed behind them. "Trail's that way. Use it while it's still open." They didn't argue. They left. But they left something behind. Later that afternoon, I found it tucked under the welcome mat. A new notice. Final warning. Non-compliance with visual standards. Failure to remove an unauthorized structure, cabin, may result in penalty, civil action, or forced removal. I held it in both hands, stunned at the stupidity. These people didn't just want me out. They were actually building a paper trail for some kind of HOA-backed eviction fantasy. But here's the thing they still didn't understand. This isn't their land. They could write all the fake rules they wanted. But unless one of those clipboards had a county seal, a court order, or a sheriff's signature, I wasn't going anywhere. That evening, I scanned the final warning, added it to my growing digital archive, and sent it to Lyle, my attorney. He replied in less than 5 minutes. Let them dig their own grave. Every piece of paper they hand you is a nail in their coffin. Keep documenting. So I did. I mounted a second camera, one facing the trail, one over the driveway. I even set up a motion alert system that pinged my phone every time someone crossed into the dock line. The battle had officially moved into phase 2. This wasn't just about evicting me anymore. This was about HOA overreach and who actually owns this town. By the next week, things had gone quiet again. Too quiet. No more knocks, no more clipboards, no more notes tucked under the mat like a coward's calling card. Just the sound of loons across the lake and the occasional kayak paddling by, careful, as if even the water sensed tension on shore. I'd seen enough HOA fights to know silence usually meant planning. Sure enough, on Thursday at exactly 11 a.m., I saw them coming up the driveway, a caravan of 2 black SUVs and 1 gray Lexus, with temporary plates, the kind of rental you grab when you want to look official without actually being local. Out stepped Cheryl, of course, sunglasses, blazer, the whole corporate executive of a neighborhood council look. Behind her, 2 more board members I didn't recognize, and finally, a man in a navy blue suit with a briefcase. The lawyer. I met them halfway down the drive, boots in the gravel, arms folded. "Mr. Lane," Cheryl began, "we're here in good faith to negotiate a resolution." "That so?" I asked, eyes fixed on the man with the briefcase. "Because the last note you left talked about forced removal. That doesn't exactly scream good faith." The lawyer stepped forward, all smooth confidence. "Mr. Lane, I'm Richard Ellman, counsel representing the Silver Lake HOA. We've reviewed the association's boundaries, and while your claim to the cabin is acknowledged, there remains a question of shared community land usage, particularly around the dock and lakeside path." I didn't even blink. "There's no question. You're on my land." He smiled, the rehearsed kind. "We believe this matter can be settled amicably if you're willing to cede a small easement and bring the structure into HOA visual compliance. This would include resiting the exterior, modifying the roofline, and of course submitting all upgrades through the Architectural Review Board." I laughed. Out loud. "Let me get this straight," I said. "You want me to surrender land I own, alter a historic structure built by my grandfather, and submit my personal property to the approval of a board that doesn't even have jurisdiction here?" Cheryl stepped in. "It's what's best for the community image, Mr. Lane." There it was, that word again. Image. They didn't care about boundaries. They cared about brochures, about property values, about wiping away anything that didn't fit their curated lakeside fantasy. Too bad reality doesn't work like Photoshop. I turned to the lawyer. "You said you reviewed boundaries. Did you happen to check Parcel 3B's deed history?" He hesitated. I didn't wait. I pulled out a folder from my back pocket, laminated, notarized, and tabbed for convenience. Handed it right to him. "That's the full county registry. Parcel 3B. Owned outright by Robert Lane since 1966. Transferred legally to Travis Lane, that's me, in accordance with his will and estate closure. That dock, that trail, that little hill where you hosted the HOA barbecue last summer, all on my land." He flipped through it, frowning with each page. "You can try to fight it," I continued, "but every legal step you take just draws more attention to how far out of bounds you already are." Cheryl looked like she was chewing lemons. "This doesn't change the fact that your cabin's appearance affects the character of our neighborhood," she snapped. "And your arrogance affects my lunch," I said. "But I'm not filing a complaint." That's when Richard closed the folder. His tone had shifted. Well, Mr. Lane, perhaps we've been a little hasty. I'll need to take this under advisement and confer with the board. I nodded. You do that. And just like that, they left. No threats, no fake tribunals, no more visual violations. Just a long line of angry faces walking back to borrowed cars, realizing they'd stepped into a legal hornet's nest. The best part? As they drove off, one of my trail cameras caught Cheryl muttering, "This whole lake is going to be a nightmare." You got that right. Because they weren't just dealing with a man in a cabin anymore. They were dealing with the man who owned the lake. I knew they wouldn't give up. People like Cheryl don't retreat. They recalculate. So while Richard the lawyer was probably digging for some obscure zoning loophole, I got ahead of them, and I went public. It started with a simple post on the community forum. You know the one. Every HOA has one. A place where neighbors post lost cat flyers, complaints about fireworks, or passive-aggressively remind others about trash bin rules. And it just so happens that I still had access. My grandfather never deleted his account. Neither did I, so I logged in under his name and dropped this. Robert Lane's cabin, now under my ownership, is not within Silver Lake HOA jurisdiction. Documents proving ownership of the dock, lakeside path, and multiple adjacent lots are available for review. Attempts to evict me or demand compliance with HOA aesthetics are not only invalid, they are trespassing. I invite anyone curious about the facts to stop by the cabin, bring questions, I'll bring coffee. Then I attached a photo of the deed. And the map. And Cheryl's last fake final warning. It took exactly 9 minutes for the comments to explode. Wait, you own the dock? This explains why they canceled the kayak race last summer. I knew something shady was going on with that board. Even better, 2 older couples from down the road knocked on my door the next afternoon. Said they'd lived near the lake for 20 years and always suspected the HOA overstepped when the walking trail got widened without permits. I welcomed them onto the porch, showed them the laminated land registry, and poured hot coffee like it was gospel. By the time they left, I had 2 new allies and a promise that they'd start asking questions at the next board meeting. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my cabin anymore. It was about every homeowner they'd silenced. Every elderly resident who got fined for planting a rose bush 2 inches too far. Every single mom told her shutters weren't community approved. Every working class neighbor was too scared to push back because they couldn't afford a lawyer. I didn't just have property rights. I had a platform. So I took it further. Printed copies of my deed and trail rights, highlighted the boundaries, and stapled them to a makeshift bulletin board outside the community rec center, right next to the HOA's monthly newsletter. And on top, I wrote in red marker, "No. Your land, before someone else tries to claim it." People stopped, took photos. One guy muttered, "Finally," under his breath and gave me a nod. That same evening, I received an email from an anonymous address. They're holding an emergency board meeting, trying to rewrite boundary maps. You're rattling the whole damn tree. Keep going. And I did. I filed an official complaint with the county registrar's office, requesting a formal review of the HOA's boundary assertions and their use of public easements, many of which I now suspected were unauthorized. I attached copies of everything and CC'd the local news outlet's property beat reporter. Next morning, I got a call from Channel 9 Investigates. We'd love to do a story on what's happening at Silver Lake. Oh, Cheryl was going to. Love that. By the end of that week, the community wasn't whispering anymore. They were watching. And the HOA? They were scrambling. Because suddenly, the guy in the cabin wasn't just some reclusive landowner with an axe and a stubborn streak. He was the guy holding the receipts. He was the guy with the cameras. He was the guy on the evening news. And Cheryl? She was just a woman with a clipboard who'd finally backed into the wrong corner. I should have known their next move would be theatrical. When logic fails, power-hungry HOAs like Silver Lake always fall back on smoke, mirrors, and meetings packed with staged outrage. So when I got the flyer in my mailbox, not from Cheryl, mind you, but slid in anonymously, I knew exactly what was coming. Emergency HOA meeting, rezoning proposal for community cohesion. Location, Silver Lake Clubhouse. Date, Thursday, or 6:30 p.m. Open to all residents. Rezoning for cohesion. Translation. Let's vote this man's cabin off the map, and they were calling it an open forum, which meant they were trying. To make it look democratic while stacking the room with supporters fed a script, I didn't panic. I prepared. On Thursday evening, I didn't show up in flannel and boots. I showed up in a navy blazer, clean shave, a USB stick in my pocket, and a printed binder for each board member. 42 pages of notarized deeds, registered surveys, property tax receipts, and annotated county plats. If they wanted a performance, I was ready to give them a show. The clubhouse was full, standing room only. Cheryl stood at the front in a beige power suit, smiling tightly like a cruise director preparing to gently kick someone off the ship. Before we begin, she said, tapping the microphone, I'd like to remind everyone that this is a civil discussion. Our goal is to ensure community standards are respected and that our neighborhood remains harmonious. A few heads nodded. Most looked confused. Then she pointed toward me. We'll begin with comments from Mr. Lane. Sir, the floor is yours. Oh, Cheryl, you shouldn't have. I stepped up slowly, took the mic, looked straight at her, then turned to the crowd. My name is Travis Lane. Some of you may know me. Some of you might have only heard whispers. So let me make something clear tonight. I am not your problem. Your board is. The room went still. I pulled the USB from my pocket, walked over to the projector plugged into the clubhouse's dusty TV system and clicked it in, on the screen, a high-res map of Parcel 3B. My grandfather's original deed, the 1985 county aerial photo showing my cabin, dock, and shoreline trail, untouched. Then came the documents. Transfer of ownership to me. Water rights certification. County letters confirming the HOA never filed for permission to maintain any public structures on my land. I let the silence soak in. This isn't just about a cabin, I said. This is about overreach, about a board that decided they could draw new lines and hope nobody looked close enough to call their bluff. Cheryl stepped in. Mr. Lane, I raised my hand. You'll get your turn. Then I turned to the audience again. This board has attempted to evict me, harass me, threaten legal action without jurisdiction, and now, tonight, they're holding a vote to try and rewrite geography. But let me ask you something. How can they vote on land they don't own? How can they regulate a property that has never, not once, been inside their domain? A man near the back shouted, Wait, is that true? I nodded. It's in your hands right now, I said, gesturing to the stack of binders I'd placed, at the entry. Page 7, line 3, public record. That's when the meeting started to unravel. People flipped pages, murmurs rose. A woman stood up. I've lived here 19 years. You mean they never had permission to put that boardwalk behind the cabin? No, ma'am, I said. And neither did they when they installed the HOA benches or held last year's. Some are social, both on Lane property. Cheryl was visibly sweating now. She leaned into the mic. Mr. Lane's documentation is under review. We're still awaiting legal. Funny, I interrupted, because the county registrar already responded. You got the email, right? She blinked. What? I smiled. Public record request sent by me. County confirmed this week, all I. HOA activity on Parcel 3B, unauthorized. I have the signed letter in my pocket. I held it up. Printed. Stamped. Gold county seal at the bottom. The board went silent. People started walking out. One man muttered, This is a damn scam, as he passed Cheryl. By the end of the night, the vote never happened. The meeting was declared inconclusive. And I? I walked out with my binder under one arm and a room full of former skeptics now fully awake. They'd tried to corner me with a fake vote, but I buried them with the truth. Loud, clear, and unshakable. Because that's the thing about HOA power grabs. They work until someone shows up with receipts. 1 week after the so-called emergency meeting, no one mentioned the word vote, No one knocked on my door. No new letters arrived. No new warning signs showed up on my grandfather's old fence. Cheryl disappeared from the community forum. Word was she took a temporary leave for health reasons. I wasn't surprised, because the last time I looked her in the eyes at that meeting, I didn't see authority. I saw fear, not fear of me, but fear of the truth. Fear of numbers, signatures, maps that couldn't be edited or erased. Fear of one old cabin standing in the middle of their glossy neighborhood like a splinter that reminded them, not everything old is weak. Not everyone quietly will bow. The following week, I received a letter. This time, not from the HOA, but from the County Land Surveyor's office. In it, they stated, based on my complaint and submitted evidence, they were launching an official investigation into land misuse by the so-called Silver Lake HOA. In the meantime, all construction, expansion, or public infrastructure changes around the lake were frozen pending review of the true boundaries. I read that letter 3 times, stunned, not from joy, but from relief. It felt like the whole lake finally exhaled. Another week passed and a Channel 9 news crew returned. This time, they didn't just interview me. They interviewed my neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Simmons, the elderly couple once fined $300 for leaving up their American flag too long after Independence Day, stood on their porch, looked directly into the camera, and said, "We used to think we had no rights, but if Mr. Lane can stand up, maybe we can too." I didn't say a word, just placed a hand on his shoulder. The next day, I took a walk around the lake. There were no more suspicious glances, just a light breeze brushing the water, the creak of wood beneath my dock, which for years they had claimed was shared community property. I looked back at the cabin, its weathered roof sloping under the afternoon sun. On the porch, the wooden chair my grandfather used to sit in was still there, steady as ever. I stepped onto it, sat down, set my steaming coffee mug on the armrest, and hit record. A simple clip. I uploaded it to the community forum. My name is Travis Lane. I'm not a lawyer, not a politician. I'm just the grandson of a man who knew where his land began and ended. And I'm here to remind folks, when someone shows up with a clipboard and says you don't belong, ask them one thing. Are you sure? Because sometimes all it takes is one old map to dismantle an entire system built on illusion. Since that day, I've become a small symbol, not the TV hero kind, the kind where someone whispers, "He's the guy who wouldn't bend," the one who made the HOA back down. But to me, the most important thing is, the cabin still stands, the lake is still calm, and the sign at the entrance to the land, private property, no trespassing. For the first time in years is being respected, not because I threatened anyone, not because I had money, but because I had the truth. And I wasn't afraid to lay it bare for the world to see. In a world where HOAs increasingly act like miniature governments, issuing orders, enforcing punishments, and redrawing rules to suit themselves, the thing they fear most isn't an angry man. It's a man who knows his rights, a man who isn't afraid of a knock on the door, isn't scared of a threat, isn't afraid to stand alone against a crooked system. That old lake cabin still stands, a quiet monument to resolve, and the man on the porch, coffee in hand, doesn't need to yell, doesn't need to beat anyone, because he kept the most important thing, the truth, and the land his family never let go of.